Sir, if you talk to students, they say colleges want something else. They don't have those skills of what to say. And when you talk to college, they said we're not getting the right students which they want. तो किसको चाहिए क्या ये समझ नहीं आता इस चीज़ में. That's why sir today I want you to come on our side of the table. थोड़ी देर के लिए आप भूल जाओ कि आप एक admissions के head हो.
Sure.
And make us understand what I can do to improve my profile.
Sure.
And so that's what we're talking about. So
Right.
sir, we want to start with your introduction first.
Sure. So my name is Arshdeep. I went to FMS, so I have some idea about what we'll be talking about. So I've been to a B school and then was working as a management consultant with one of the consulting firms. And then, currently, I lead admissions for Altera Institute, right? So this is something where some folks from the industry, we started this off and then, more people joined in. But we'll talk about that later. But just, getting back to your question on, like, if I just divide this into two, that ideally, students find it tough to figure out that, what exactly they should be working on in their profile. And at the same time, B schools all the while, if you meet any professor, or anyone, even seniors feel that is bar batch nahi utna acha hai, they don't have the right profile. So ideally, let me, try to divide it into two parts. Right. First, what should students be focusing on? Because, as of right now, we are in, December. In some time, the CAT results will come out, right? Students, and there will be a frenzy that how do I build my profile, and then, how do I justify, my own profile in an interview. So let me just try to break that into, even that into two parts. One is just your own self, right? Just your personal profile. And second is just some functional knowledge, or rather I will say perspective, right? And third, actually there's a third part also to it, that just having some anchors on your profile, right? The ones you mentioned, right? Some profile elements, right? Now the first thing is, if I think about it from a personal interviews point of view, is being able to, justify who you are and what your interests are when you're sitting in that interview, right? Because look, irrespective of what you do in the next 3-4 months before going to a B school, 90% of your profile will remain the same. Even till the time students go for summer internships, it more or less remains the same only. As, I recall in FMS, like a placement cell member used to say, वो पुराने पाप हैं, वो, even if it is, whatever it's there, right? You can't do much about it. Think about what you can do, right? And we'll cover that in the second part.
Purane Paap, I like to hold you there.
Okay, sure.
So when you take about Purane Paap, so if I have a gap year,
sure,
or if my academic record is low in my 10th, 12th, I can't change it. Sure. I can take out the present, which we'll talk in some time. So is it okay to have bad academic record?
No, absolutely.
Are you fine with that if I'm applying to your college?
Yeah. Look, and to any college rather, because I've also, had that perspective, just talked to, faculties from some B schools also. Look, up till the time you are able to justify it, right? If I talk about gap year or low grades also, right? Because if your reason for getting a 6 CGPA in your undergrad is that I was watching YouTube videos or Netflix, then of course that's not justifiable, because you could have done something much better with your time, right? But if you were, let's say, focusing on, like, you were one of the early adopters of just building on any digital platforms, just making some YouTube content, or at the same time, just even sports, for example, right? You were the sports captain for your cricket team, right? Essentially, that just helps in justifying that while ideally you were expected to do well, academically, but because you had a slightly different inclination, you were able to do something better over there. Correct. Because you were devoting time over there, right?
Correct.
So, and same for gap year also, right? If the reason for your gap year is that I've seen people, for 3 years just preparing for tests and not making use of any other time, especially for CAT audience, right? Because all they think is that CAT is one of those exams. It's not like UPSC, right? It's not a exam which has a particular syllabus. It's an aptitude test, right? So you should ideally be using that time also. And that is what, even the top IIMs, and even when we look, because, we follow a profile-based shortlisting process. So we are also looking at similar things, that if a person has a gap year, then what were they doing in that gap year, right? It could be something as basic as, say as a certification, if you were working at an NGO, like, even something as basic, or even, say building your own skills, right? And people can have n number of reasons for it, right? Because we are at that age where, there are n number of opportunities available for people. So just look for that. How can you justify it? Because always think about it, and even that justification can't be shallow, right? You can't just mention that, I was working in my family business and, just create a fake certificate from there, because you will get caught out, right? Because, think of it that what are B school faculties or admission teams looking at, right? They are looking at people who have certain level of aptitude, which they test through test scores. And secondly, the ability to be able to fight for something, right? And acads are one way to test for it, but some other ways also, right? That if you were doing, let's say, your own business, right? And it might have failed, right? It's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. But were you able to fight for it? And in that process, did you learn something new, right? So if I cut the long story short, if you have a good and a robust, justification for it, then that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
It's like मैं football देखता था नहीं चलेगा, मैं football खेलता था
yeah,
चलेगा
and even sure, you were watching football, but were you so heavily involved in it that you were running, let's say, your own Medium page where you were just publishing something out of it? Right, there has to be some tangible output, right? I mean, something that you can show for it. I mean, I remember one of these candidates that I met outside my IIM Calcutta interview. He was just publishing, and I'm talking of some 8-9 years back when like we used to have a lot of listicle content coming out like BuzzPedia and all, and he was one of the editors over there. Imagine engineering student, mechanical engineer, and just shipping out content, top 10 things to do in Bombay or top 10 things to do in Delhi, right? Again, like he had something to show for it, right? That's what I'm talking about. But just to complete my previous point, first, be very thorough with your own profile, right? And the second point that I mentioned was have some perspective on things, right? Because that is what most B schools look for in interviews. And the third is, in between that time when your results are yet to come and you go to a B school, which is ideally from April to July, try to get some more perspective, do some certifications, not for the sake of having them on your CV, but just to get some more perspective about different profiles, right? Because most people, they are, especially freshers, they're not really fixated, and hoga bhi to just hearsay se hoga ki mujhe finance hi karna hai, and they might not be that 100% sure about it. Try to get more perspective in this time. Yeah, that is what I'll say to that question.
Correct. Sir, moving to the next part, we talked about the general knowledge. A lot of colleges are checking your general awareness, all these things. So uske liye what I normally say कि यार India Today, Business Today, 2 magazine last 3 month का ले लो, and that will give you enough content to talk about.
And to that, and everyone
Rose
can
paper,
have their,
do you expect to
and look again, this is because this just reminds me of one thing that I was told that as soon as people get shortlists, the first thing that they do before writing down or telling me about yourself is subscribe to the Hindu. Right now, while that is important, right, but that will fall in the second bucket that I mentioned, right? Because the first thing and the most important thing that you should be doing ideally is to be very thorough with your own profile, right? As simple a question as tell me about yourself, right? It can go on, and your whole interview can just revolve around that, because assume you mentioned 6-7 things in your introduction. It was a 1-minute introduction, but you mentioned 6-7 things on it. The interview could just revolve around those 6-7 things, and you would not be asked anything related to your acads or general awareness and all, right? But as we come to that point, and in most cases where this might be asked are especially for freshers, because they would not have a lot of other anchors on their profile. Because imagine if I'm a guy with work experience, I would have 3-4 different things to talk about: my educational background, what I was doing at work, some other internships that I would have done. In most cases, freshers don't have that, right? So for them, just having perspective, because if even after introduction everything has lasted for 5 minutes, then of course people would want to get your perspective on that. What do you feel about, let's say, the new education policy? Because again, coming back to that point, think about what are B school professors looking for in that interview, right? They're looking at 3 things ideally, right? Is what I believe. The first is aptitude, and most of it is checked through any of the entrance tests that we take. Second is perspective, and the third is just that how can you communicate the perspective that you have, right? The second and the third are the ones that are primarily tested in the interview, right? And over there, what is expected is that do you even know what is going on in the world, right? So for you to be an aware person and not have a perspective on, let's say, the recent war between Russia and Ukraine is unacceptable, right? Because the whole world knows about it. Yeah. So just have a perspective and then be able to communicate it in a very simple, straightforward manner. Don't be very fancy about it. Yeah.
Correct. I believe you should have a story like that.
Absolutely.
That is past, present, and future.
Yeah.
They have to be in sync with each other. ऐसा नहीं कि आपने इंजीनियरिंग की और एंड देन यू आर सेइंग कि फ्यूचर में तुम्हें कुछ अलग करना है.
Yeah.
So there have to be that journey have to be set.
No, absolutely. And even if you, let's say, want to pivot, right? And, you know, of course, I am also an engineer, right? And then I went into consulting. Now I'm in education, right? Now that is a very non-linear path,
Correct.
right? But, and I might not have known that when I was sitting, let's say, for my FMS interview or ISB or AM Calcutta, whatever, right? But just having at that time, right, what you aspire for, right? Because at that time I used to work in a healthcare consulting firm as an analyst, and I wanted to, you know, get into consulting and analytics. And, you know, my whole aim at that time was that, look, I'd done electrical engineering, right? But I find more joy and, you know, interest coming out of the field of analytics, right? So I wanted to, you know, pursue a career in that. So it was at least aligned. Now, having that background, you know, had I said that, you know, I now want to go into advertising, when I've not even done anything related to advertising, now, you know, that seems a bit, you know, disconnected, right? So as you mentioned, right, your past, present and future, there has to be some common line that connects it. Yeah.
Correct. And वही सुनाओ जो वो सुनना चाहता है.
Yeah.
आगे जाके तो वो जॉब करना है सर. I have interviewed student where a girl have said she want to be a fashion designer.
Yeah.
तो वहाँ जाना यार MBA करने क्यों आ रही है? You can't say this in MBA interview.
Look, and even if you say this, then, you know, think about how will you justify the things that you learn in an MBA course or from any B school, and how will that help you in the career aspiration that you have?
Exactly.
Right? There has to be some connect, right? It can't be non-connected. Yeah,
Exactly. तो वो एक link लेके आना पड़ेगा.
Absolutely.
Thank you sir. Thank you very much for talking.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.